Look, if you're into the real nerd stuff, fantasy games like Dungeons and Dragons, then you've probably heard the name Gary Gygax, often credited as the creator of D&D. But just under the mainstream surface, there's also Dave Arneson, the bona fide co-creator of Dungeons and Dragons, who made the very first dungeon in the very first medieval fantasy setting that was designed to be played in character, instead of just read out of a novel or viewed on stage or screen. But for those who do a little more digging, one last name comes up, or should I say, one first name. The very first person to design and run what we today would recognize as a pen and paper role-playing game. That man who directly inspired Dave Arneson by killing his character in the first ever RPG session, and who coined the use of polyhedral dice in RPGs despite later telling Gygax that it was a mistake. He who is technically responsible for every nerdy fandom that has branched from D&D. That man is David Wesley. And last month, I got to meet him face to face and play in his, rather, the original RPG scenario, and it was wild. So yes, that's already 2 important Daves for anyone keeping score, but I'm Bob. This is where we learn how to have more fun playing RPGs together, and this is the story of where every role-playing game began, and the #1 lesson I learned from this experience with the great-grandfather of RPGs. The year is 1967. There's a war in Vietnam. The US civil rights movement is bleeding into the summer of love, marked by some legendary music that I definitely can't play on YouTube. And we're still several years ahead of the first blockbuster movies like Jaws and Star Wars that would redefine pop culture. So most teenagers and 20-somethings' idea of a good time was either going out to play sports, dance, and just drive around, or staying in to literally sit and listen to a record, maybe play a board game or read a book, or go watch whatever was on your friend's new color TV. No other at-home video unless you had a reel-to-reel player, no 24-hour news cycle, and no such thing as notifications. Wow. But there were plenty of niche hobbies too, and the one shared by our key players was historical wargaming. The fascinating part is how these gamers all designed their own games, because at this time, some wargaming toy sets existed, and commercial wargames for older hobbyists were just starting to pop up, but you still couldn't walk into a game store and buy one box containing both a set of miniatures and a rulebook if you were kinda in between that boyish wargame and the serious hobbyist. So most of these gamers relied on their own group's collections of various figurines, often customized to match different periods of history, and the players' collective knowledge of history to define their own rules. But this playstyle had a problem, at least for groups like David Wesley's. He described to me how games could easily turn into debates where one side would not back down about the feasibility of whatever military maneuver they were trying to achieve because, paraphrasing Wesley's point, turning the game into a debate meant that they could win by just wearing down the other guy's patience or running out the clock for game night. Unfortunately, a practice that continues to this day, but mostly in RPG horror stories, which we know are mostly fictional. In any case, that's poor sportsmanship, and it certainly doesn't sound fun. So, in 1967, Wesley went looking for answers in the best place he could think of, the card catalog in the nearby library of the University of Minnesota. And there he uncovered an ancient tome, Strategos, a US Army wargame rulebook published in 1880, so about 90 years old at that time, almost 150 years old today, and it contained one game design concept that Wesley would use to change his game and yours forever. Strategos, Chapter 3, Special Rules for Conducting the Advanced Game. The decision of the referee will in all cases be final and should not be questioned. He should, however, generally conform to the rules and methods herein given, and, whenever for good cause he differs therefrom, he should give his reasons. In other words, One player has the final say on rulings, explaining why their decision differs from the rulebook if necessary. To you and me, this should feel like common sense for how a game master operates in a role-playing game, even taking things a little far, requiring them to detail how and why they're diverting from the rulebook every time. But imagine the alternative. A game of D&D where the loudest or most confident player, even if incorrect, always got their way in a disagreement. It would be anarchy. It would be pure bandwagoning. It would be Reddit. And I'm finally putting together why RPG horror stories thrive on that website. That's the problem Dave Wesley was facing and why he read 100 pages deep into this extremely dry 180-page rulebook, probably catching his attention on no disputes will be allowed in the game room. So for Wesley's group testing it out, this newly rediscovered concept of the referee was both revolutionary and divisive. He told me how, since he was a college student at this time, but about half the group were older gentlemen, they didn't like the idea of being bossed around by some young punk. But the other half of the group were younger than Wesley, so they either looked up to him a bit, or they at least liked the idea of having only one somewhat older guy bossing everyone around equally. Furthermore, Strategos brought to light a few other important RPG concepts that have lasted to this day. The office of referee should be regarded not so much in the light of an advisor as of an arbiter. He should bear in mind the principle that anything can be attempted. The referee decides upon the length of time to be comprehended in the playing of a particular game under consideration, as well as some concepts that did not remain popular. The referee is allowed one or two assistants who may also act in the capacity of umpires and advisors, always, however, subordinate to the referee. And my favorite. In playing the advanced game, a set of screens should entirely conceal the players and their tables from each other. Funny enough, that one about separating the players with screens did stick around in the early days of role-playing, and kind of technically today with GM screens, but it is partially responsible for how role-playing as we know it formed organically and accidentally during Wesley's first time running the RPG scenario, which I recently got to play. So we're going to shift into the familiar and strange parts of that game right after I describe today's awesome sponsor. Describe, a long-standing, award-winning collection of descriptions, maps, and audio used by thousands of game masters and players. Seriously, for longer than some editions of D&D, Describe has provided an ever-growing collection of now 16,000 box text descriptions for every location, monster, NPC, magic item, and more, all written by humans to give your games a lot more immersion with a lot less prep. But they also have maps with every part tied to a description, and Opus, a browser app for custom or pre-made collections of music, ambient tracks, and sound effects, which you can even stream online to your players. With over 8,000 total sounds today, Describe teamed up with the guy who developed the Avre Discord bot for D&D Beyond to make searching for the right track easier than ever. So check out Describe and Opus using the link below and code BOB for an extended free trial. Nature break for this deer that you can probably barely see. Basically just watching me record that last part of the video for like 10 or 15 minutes, maybe wanting to learn a little about D&D history. One more kind of step down into the open. What a very observant and patient bunch. Well, I need to finish. Oh, there's the snort. They're gone. Okay. All right, bye guys. The most significant part of this story and the birth of role-playing games comes from David Wesley's Braunstein scenario, because it combined two revolutionary concepts in game design: the referee, which we've discussed, and playing as an individual character with individual goals. Again, this should seem commonplace to you and me enjoying RPGs today, but up until this point in the late 1960s, the closest approximation these players had was wargaming, and that meant two sides, each in control of entire armies represented by groups of figurines. And unlike Wesley's reading of Strategos directly inspiring his adoption of the referee concept, as far as I can tell from some online research and speaking with him last month, he had no singular inspiration for designing a scenario with this sort of one-to-one role-playing. To the contrary, Wikipedia says that Wesley got this concept from an older game called Diplomacy, which focused on player negotiation, but it doesn't cite a source. Not to mention the board game Clue, where players also had individual roles and... That sounds so close. The tracks haven't moved. Why does it sound closer? I mean, we could do another nature break during the train. When's the last time it was just raining during your D&D game? Not a crazy storm, not a super light rain just for the sake of having some mist, but just a slightly annoying rain. So the other possible source of inspiration could have been something as simple as the popular board game Clue, where players had individual roles, and that had come out in the 1940s based on the prototypical murder mystery detective parties of the 1930s that have continued to this day. But those detective players were generally one-dimensional characters with the same goal, whereas Wesley's characters had individual backstories and goals which may or may not conflict with the goals of other characters. Last side note here, humble as can be, Wesley did say that he later learned other wargaming groups were experimenting with similar ideas around the same time, focusing their scenarios on smaller and smaller units. He just jumped right to the extreme, one player to one character, and he insisted that had it not been for him, someone else would have made this connection with a referee shortly thereafter. Nonetheless, David Wesley created a unique gaming experience called Braunstein. Nature break for this groundhog living under this pavilion that I decided to go onto to get out of the rain, who just poked out after I started setting up. That was funny. This name comes from the fictional German city where the game takes place in the year 1897, with very real historical threats from within and without the city. Here's a scan of a character sheet that I found online because I didn't think to snap a bunch of pictures of my packet at the time. And this one happens to provide a good deal of background info for the scenario, its boiling political tensions, and the threats to the city, so we're gonna read it in full. Braunstein 1, the world's first RPG, sort of. Student A. You are a highly patriotic and loyal subject of your king and country, Friedrich Wilhelm IV of Prussia. You have been dismayed to find that the dangerous ideas of the French Revolution are widely repeated by the students and faculty of the university. The chancellor and mayor both refuse to listen to your warnings about the NBB, a radical pro-French student movement. Only the Landwehr Major, aka the town guard captain, seems to hate revolutionaries as much as you do, but he is lazy and inept, and does not treat you with respect. You have gathered a band of students who will stand with you against the NBB. When asked what you would call yourselves, you will say, "We are Prussians. Our honor needs no other name." And as leader of the fencing team, you can and have defended your honor on the dueling ground many times. Recent events. Last night, you were insulted by Student B, the head of the pro-French NBB. When you challenged him to a duel, he replied, "I accept. Beer steins at 2 paces," and emptied his beer on your head. Your friends stepped in, the fight spread, and the guards arrested everyone. You start in jail with many of your fellow students. The guard took away your sword. Finally, your objectives. Get you and your friends out of jail. Have as many of the NBB students kept in jail /hanged/shot as possible. Force Student B to fight a proper duel with you and defeat him. Save Braunstein from the French army, which is rumored to be approaching. So as you can tell from that example, every role is simply a position in the town rather than a named character, and it works because there's clearly a lot of information to internalize pretty quickly without also needing to learn a ton of new names for the player's characters. Here's the one picture I took of my packet showing my character art on the front, and my packet, for example, as the sergeant of the town guard, included even more information on Braunstein's defenses with a typewritten map of the city, as well as some information about Student E, rumored to be the bastard son of an important figure in town, and my goals, primarily to assess which students are innocent, being encouraged to accept bribes as long as I can impress my boss, the major, and lastly, to defend Bronstein. And with a modern gaming perspective, I really want to emphasize that these pages of information were supplementary to Wesley's roughly 45-minute long briefing on the world-building, history, and political shifts in Prussia and Bronstein over the last 300 years before we started the actual game. So totally, if that were any other game master or campaign, I probably would have gotten bored, but to have the opportunity to hear the great-grandfather of RPGs explain his campaign's lore was genuinely riveting, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Now, here are the other notable points about the original game and what I experienced. The first Bronstein session happened in Dave Arneson's basement in December 1967. David Wesley, the referee, prepared for around 8 or 10 players, but 22 showed up. Therefore, most of the roles were improvised in that first game. I played in a group of 19 people, but Wesley said he's now used to around 25, so there were a few roles that have become more important over the decades that weren't included in our scenario. In that first game, Wesley sat in another room. Remember the screens to separate everybody? So he was away from the players, and they were supposed to take turns coming to him and explaining their actions. But what actually happened was that all the players just started talking amongst themselves in that other room, wheeling and dealing to complete their objectives. This is a huge part of how the game became popular at that time and how my session played out, with players often visiting Wesley in pairs or small groups to make requests toward their shared goals. So personally, I did this with the guard captain, played by Mrs. Professor Dungeon Master, as she was basically the only other character I felt confident about trusting with my goals, which again was pretty much just to keep all the students in jail. But in the original game, Dave Arneson played one of the students and went to Wesley with a member of the town guard, stating that they wanted to duel. Something that Wesley had not prepared for, but he let Arneson roll 2d6, the guard rolled 3d6 as an experienced soldier, and the exact rolls are lost to time. But the difference was great enough that rather than ending the duel with a small but honorable amount of bloodshed, Wesley ruled that Arneson's student was the first ever character to be killed in a role-playing game. Wild, because I guess he was hooked from there and went on to design Blackmore and D&D. As I understand it, that's actually why Student A's goals that we read a minute ago evolved to include requesting a duel. But much to my surprise, no one attempted any violence during our session, though I did prevent Student A from skewering Student B by never returning their sword. Because they were in jail, obviously. That was a weird one. I don't know why I was gonna ever give them the sword, to be honest. Really, I had little reason to trust any of the students because they all pointed fingers at each other, and if it were just up to me, all but one student who I could prove their innocence would have stayed in jail. Though out of game, I knew that would be boring, so I, the player, was glad that the mayor character ended up releasing them all. However, that did result in a French spy getting away, but that was partially my fault too, because I, the player, left my character packet on a table while we were all distracted by another player saving this hummingbird that got stuck in the pavilion where we were playing. It was a whole thing. Here's a cool photo. Make sure you see the photo if you're just washing your dishes. And so the spy saw my map of the town with the guard postings, and in an extremely metagaming way, I technically screwed up, I guess, but still managed to win the post-game vote for Best Defender of Bronstein because I tried to keep everybody in jail. Okay, this video could go on for a very, very long time, but I'm ready to distill the single most important lesson for you, the modern game master, from my conversations with David Wesley, from gratefully getting to play in his Bronstein game, and from reading about his experiences designing, running, and redesigning the world's first RPG, sort of. It's not super earth-shattering like most of what we've discussed in this video. It is listen to your players. David Wesley knew his fellow players didn't like those rules debates, so he found a solution, the referee, and the game got better. Wesley also thought his first Bronstein was a flop because it got completely out of control, but the players said they wanted more. So he ran a new variation, this time with more constraints, and this time it did flop. So he loosened up again. and the fourth Bronstein, which actually took place in a fictional South American country, ended with Dave Arneson's student revolutionary character fleeing in a US government helicopter pretending to be a CIA operative, ultimately smashing his objective to distribute leaflets by scattering them into the air. And the rest is history. Wesley told me some other funny stories about how he didn't love the term role-playing because it was already used by improv comedians and therapists, and even though he introduced polyhedral dice to Arneson and Gygax after ordering a set of numbered platonic solids from a school catalog, he was convinced that requiring those dice to play D&D would tank the game because they were so expensive at the time. This is my favorite thing about David Wesley. He had strong opinions about what was fun and what was not, but he never clutched so tightly as to get in the way of other people's fun, because he listened, and it was a privilege to have him share that wisdom firsthand. So to keep this sign-off simple, thank you, David Wesley, for starting off this hobby with such a powerful lesson at heart. That is another reason you are the great-grandfather of RPGs. Keep building.